Shalom Aleichem, Rabbi Kovacs here. Mishnah Yomi is in chapter 5 of Gittin, Mishnah Hey. Heid Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgida. He testified, meaning he had a mesorah, that these were accepted halachot, accepted rabbinical enactments, ala chareshet, on a little girl who is unable to communicate. A cheresh is someone who's deaf and mute, and since they're unable to communicate, we're not quite sure they have the same intellectual functioning as someone who can communicate. Shehesiya aviha, and her father had married her off to a man, shehi yotze beget, that she can accept a get to end that marriage. Now this is even though we're not quite sure she's of full intellectual capacity, she's able to take care of a get and understand the concept of marriage and divorce. We allow her to get divorced through a get. And this is even when it wasn't her father that married her off, but if there was no father and her marriage was rabbinic, she was assisted by her mother or her brothers, that too would work through a get. Ve'al ketana bat Yisrael, and on a young Jewish girl, shenisit leKohen, she was married to Mr. Cohen, and this marriage was not through her father, but her father had passed away, and she was an orphan, and she was married by her mother or brothers. It's a rabbinic marriage, a kedushay ketana, that she has the right to end through miyun, as we discussed in detail in Yevamot. Now, she's married to Mr. Cohen on a rabbinic level. Now, we know Mrs. Cohen, if it's a real, true marriage, can eat truma. This is only rabbinic marriage, but here, shochelet betruma. She is allowed to eat truma, meta, and if she passes away during this marriage, bala yorsha, Mr. Cohen indeed inherits her. So we treat this as a biblical level marriage, even though technically, yes, she has the right to walk out when she grows up. The third halacha, al hamorish hagozel, a stolen beam. This is like a large, like a 4x4, an I-beam or something. Someone stole it, benau babira, and then built it into a large building. Sheyitul et damav, that he can pay the value instead of demolishing the building. Mipnei takanot hashavim. For the tikkun, here it's not tikkun olam, it's takanot shavim. Those who are doing teshuvah, those who are returning from their sin, we don't make him demolish the entire structure he built to return one beam. We have him pay the value of the beam and keep the structure. There's actually an amazing Gemara in Ta'anit, Daf 16, about Nineveh. When Yonah, the prophet Jonah, went to Nineveh and told him to do teshuvah, they made a proclamation there that if someone had stolen a beam or a brick, they had to tear down the building and return the actual beam. So they did not rely on this takanot teshavim. They went all out. Now you might say that made their teshuvah more wholehearted, but we see that after Jonah passed away, the people of Nineveh reverted to doing evil again. So maybe trying too hard to be righteous and not taking advantage of ways to return in teshuvah easily can cause backsliding. Finally, the Mishnah adds another halacha, al hatat hagazula, a hatat, a sin offering. So the animal was stolen, shelo nodol rabim, and people don't know it was stolen, so the thief is bringing an offering, shehi mechaperet. It does work. It's a valid offering, with a tikkun mizbeach, to be tikkun olam here for the altar. And the Mefarshim explains really for the tikkun of the kohanim, because if the kohanim were eating this karban chatat and then realize it was stolen, they would feel very bad, they'd be very upset, they'd be very hesitant to bring karbanot of the people. So these are all forms of tikkun olam, and now we're going to turn to Mishnah Vav, which is very scary and very famous. And the Gemara related to this Mishnah is found starting on Gittin, Daf 55b, and it's about the destruction, the sad and terrible destruction and calamities that befell the Jewish people in the times of the Hurban Beit HaMikdash. Lo haya Sikrikon, the law of Sikrikon, we'll define that soon. Yehuda did not apply in Yehuda. Beharuge hamilchama, during the time the Romans were, God forbid, butchering Jews during their conquest, their war, their siege. Meharuge hamilchama ve'elach, but after the war stopped and the Romans just simply hate Jews, but they're not murdering them, yesh ba Sikrikon, the law of Sikrikon does apply. Now we're going to see the Sikrikon was a non-Jewish person who was using threat of force of death to make a Jew give up his land. Now during the time of the war, when the Romans were basically saying, yeah, go and butcher all the Jews, they were telling everybody they can get involved in this, be privateers, be on their side, then a Jew would wholeheartedly give up his land and flee rather than risk death because there was no other recourse. But after the war was over, if someone was threatening death, you could go complain to the governor, and they might hate Jews, but they did tend to uphold the law, so there was some sort of recourse. So what is this din of Sikrikon? The Mishnah explains, Ketzad, how does this work? Lokach Sikrikon. A Jew buys land from the Sikrikon, the non-Jew who has used threat of force to evict the Jewish owner, the Hazar v'lokach mabalabait, and then he tracks down the real owner, the Jewish owner, and he buys it from him also. Mikaho batal. His purchase is null and void. Mibalabayit, if he goes and finds the real Jewish owner and agrees to buy from him, v'chazar lakach Sikrikon, and then he goes and he buys it, quote unquote, buys it from the Sikrikon, who's not really the real owner. Mikaho kayim. This is a valid transaction. In the first case, the Jewish owner might agree to go along with this just to make the Sikrikon happy so he doesn't get murdered. But in the second case, he's agreed first before the Sikrikon even got involved in the transaction. Now, the Mishnah brings a similar concept, lokach min ha'ish. Somebody bought real property from the man. Now, the man's real property is liened to the ketuvah, to the payment his wife would get. V'hazar lokach min ha'isha. And then he went and found the wife and also bought from her. She also agreed to this transaction. Mikaho batal. This transaction is null and void because we assume the wife simply went along with it to make her husband happy, knowing that the husband wanted to sell this piece of property. Minaisha, v'hazar lakach minaish. So he first went to the wife and said, hey, would you agree to sell this property, even though it's meshubad, it's leaned to your ketuvah payment? Hazar, and she agreed. V'lakach hazar minaish. And then he went back and bought it, actually paid the money to the husband, mikaho kayim. Here, she agreed first. This is a valid transaction. Now, the Mishnah goes back to the Sikrikon case, and it basically explains there was a historical development, sort of a change in circumstances. Zo Mishnah Rishona, this law of Sikrikon we talked about, this is the first version of events, shortly after the war and the conquest and the Hurban. Beit Din Sh'achrehim Amru, and a later court that came, once things settled down, and they were basically encouraging Jewish people to buy the land back that had been exploited or taken over, hostile takeover by non-Jewish people. They were encouraging the Jews to buy the land back. So the Beit Din wanted to make it easy for Jews to get land out of the clutches of the non-Jews. So they said, halokeach Sikrikon, if you're buying land from a Sikrikon, who probably, forced the Jew to give it up, noten l'baylim brevia. He needs to give the true owner, the Jewish owner, 1/4 of the price. And the idea being the Sikrikon would typically sell the land at a discount of about 25%, so really you're paying the difference to the true owner and paying most of it to the Sikrikon, but at the end of the day, the land is going back to the Jewish people, which we want to encourage. Ematai, so when do we allow this leniency? Bizmon she'ein bi'ado likach, when the true owner doesn't have the money to buy his land back, or his heirs, understandably. Avol yesh bi'adon likach, if they have the means to buy the land, hen kodmin l'kol adam, they have first dibs to buy the land back from the Sikrikon before any other Jewish people try to buy it. So this was step 2 in the historical development of the law of Sikrikon. Rebbe, this is Rebbe Huda Nossi, Hoshiv Beit Din, he convened a court. Now, Rebbe was born about 65 years after the Hurban Bayit, so this event took place about 100 years after the Hurban, when things were basically settling down. Even though the Romans were still in charge and still hated the Jews, Rebbe did have a good relationship with the Caesar at the time. So Rebbe established a different halacha, Nimnu, and they voted, She'im shochata bifnei Sikrikon 12 chodesh, if the land had been with the Sikrikon, the non-Jewish exploiter, for over 12 months, kol hakodem likach zoche. Anyone who could get together the money and buy it could legally buy it. Basically, the true owner or his heirs had 12 months to try to get it back. So after that point, anyone could come and buy the land back. But they should still give the true owner or his family, his heirs, 1/4. Yashar Koach, we give a bracha that Am Yisrael should be zoche to reacquire all of the Holy Land, and that we deserve it. It's our gift to Hashem. We should be zoche through our Torah and our mitzvot to be able to get it back. Again, the Gemara here, starting Gittin daf 55b, it's allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. It has the topics of the Hurban. It has some very serious Torah parental discretion advised. Yashar Kochachem Zayazut.